This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter, Chairman of NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show today. And we're going to be talking about an experienced look at board leadership. And joining me, and we're proud to have him as a guest today, is Dr. John Elstrott, who's the Chairman of Whole Foods, Inc. And I got to tell you, John, you have a lot of fans out there for Whole Foods, starting with my family.
Thank you, TK.
So you got the responsibility for board leadership at Whole Foods. So let's start. I mean, this has always been a big issue for this show. We feel that, in fact, just the other day I was on with Pat McGurn with the ISS, and I said the one thing to me, if I could measure it, that is a leading indicator for a successful board is if I find a board that has good board leadership, okay? So knowing that we have that emphasis, I'm going to ask you, talk a little bit about how you view your role on Whole Foods. Every company is different, but how do you establish the kind of leadership that's necessary to help Whole Foods be successful and have a good relationship with the CEOs?
Well, I think you need to talk about where does the board need to lead, in what areas. And there's several. The board is expected to set a standard to at least meet or exceed standards of good governance. That's the board's role, to lead in that area. The board is expected to step up when it's time to replace a CEO and to always be prepared to unexpectedly replace a CEO. So you have to constantly keep your pulse on the leadership of the company, not only who's in that leadership seat at the moment, but who could possibly replace them should it come to that. And then I think the third big area where the board needs to lead is at a time of a crisis. And periodically, every corporation goes through a crisis. Now, the way I particularly fulfill that role is I try to set a tone with the other directors and with management of respect, where we listen to one another, where we come prepared to meetings. As I like to say, I like my directors to show up dressed on time and ready to play. I like to set a standard of respect for other people's opinions. Everyone should respect what someone else has to say. And if you disagree, you should disagree based on facts and data and try to make your argument based on that.
And do you try and build a board? You know, you have a great cross-section of consumers, that is literally the whole country. So do you also try and build a board that sort of is representative of the markets that you serve and the knowledge base that you need to make sure that you're making good decisions at Whole Foods?
Not just the customers. The customers are one very, very important stakeholder, but I think it behooves any board of directors to craft itself in a way that it has representation as best as possible for all of its major stakeholder groups. So we look for board members both in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, that represent all of our stakeholder groups, and we try to do that, though, without compromising either the quality or the experience of the board members that we have. So we hire first for quality and experience, but we certainly look to balance those other issues.
Great. So if I had to categorize you, I'd categorize you as a serial entrepreneur, okay? If you look, when I read your bio, you have been involved in tens of companies, okay? I assume in sort of the startup mode. In addition to that, you have a long history of being an award-winning professor, okay, in this space as well. So knowing that you were getting involved not only in these entrepreneurial startups, but as a board member in all these, you have a wealth of experience in that. What are some of the keys that you've learned over the all your years of experience that you could sort of pass along to our audience, that here are things that have really been, sort of watershed enlightening moments for me about being a director that they would find helpful?
Well, as far as being a director and also finding good directors, they're both related topics. If I consult my notes here for a minute. What I look for in board members, and what I try to cultivate myself, is a spirit of tolerance and a sense of humor. You've got to have a sense of humor in the boardroom. I look for board members who are articulate, concise, and who base their positions on data, facts, as well as intuition. I think intuition is just as important as data and facts, where you bring your experience to bear. I look for, as we try to craft a board that's balanced, we're looking for board members that are capable of chairing the necessary committees. So as you try to put together a board for a public company, certainly you need to look for people who are capable of chairing an audit committee or chairing a compensation committee. Another part of building a good public company board is, I think it's essential these days to have a lead director, if not a non-executive chairman. I look for directors who are calm in a crisis, because as we mentioned before, there will be crises along the way, who are focused on solutions during a crisis and not focused on fear and blame. And finally, I look for directors who are good conversationalists and are affable dinner companions, because you do spend time with these people.
So let's take the leap from that to one of the challenges that all public companies have. And you represent the shareholders. There are large institutional investors that own your stock. And there is the influence of the proxy advisory firms, which is ISS and Glass Lewis. ISS has the ISS Quick Score 2.0. That is a list, most people don't know this, but it is a list of 80 plus factors, okay, that they developed these numerical scores for, that other investors find useful as a quick review of how ISS views a particular company. The ISS is somebody that might be best categorized as somebody that you can't live with and you can't live without, because there's a level of frustration sometimes in communication. So how do you sort of guide the board when you have these sort of shareholder issues out of the 80 that'll come up that might be some criticism of how you guys do business? How do you deal with that? How do you guide the board in dealing with outside shareholders like that?
Well, groups like ISS and Glassman, I think, are obviously something we have to live with, but in a way they've made us better. I mean, that 80 set of questions is something we have to look at and think about. It reminds us of areas that we need to focus on and where we need to get better. So what we do as a board and as management at Whole Foods is we work with ISS and Glassman to make sure that they get the facts correct. We work with them to get the best assessment, the best fair assessment of where we stand presently according to their criteria, because we know that some of our large shareholders use it. I have to say, though, what we prefer to communicate directly with our large shareholders about any issues they may have and about their perception of our standard of governance. So ISS is somewhat of a middleman, and they serve a role, but as much as we can keep the communication direct, I think it serves both the shareholder better and the company better.
And we both just heard that. We came from the CEO Chairman Conference upstairs, and it was interesting to hear the values of shareholder engagement. And it is true that a board needs to have interaction with its shareholders to understand how they feel. The failure to do that is really almost irresponsible in the sense of not having at least some contact with the people that you represent.
Correct.
So because you have all this experience now, I love to put people in a situation that's sort of a little different. So here we are. You have X number of years, had your students are very wise, you're involved in the markets. Today there's a perception by the media that the board members are lacking, okay? This used to be a very highly rated, high esteem kind of position. Really due to 2008, 2009, the reputation took a giant credibility hit. The media loves to pick out companies that have, done a poor job or pay their CEO too much, and it sort of created a repetitive media onslaught of the lack of performance by boards. We both know that that's not the way it is, that the board members care about their own reputation and care about representing the shareholders and do a good job. But what's it going to take, or how do we go about changing this image that so quickly deteriorated, because of the collapse in 2008 and 2009? Any observations on sort of how we change the mindset of the media and the public out there?
I think it's a problem with the mindset, not just about the performance of the board, but performance of capitalism and corporations in general. And there is in the minds of many of the public, or much of the public, that corporations more often than not are greedy and exploitive, and that directors are all part of that package. So I think there is an important job that corporations and our leaders, both directors and management, have to do to change that perception. Because capitalism and the corporations that are part of it are the best way to organize an economy. We haven't found a better one to figure out what to produce, how to produce it, and how to distribute it, to solve the basic economic problem. So basically, I think what we need to do is to focus on getting corporations to become purpose-driven and guided by their values, adhere to their values, and align themselves to fulfilling their mission and optimizing the interest of all the stakeholders rather than just focusing on maximizing short-term shareholder value. Because if you can optimize the interest of all of the stakeholders over the long run and create a sustainable corporate philosophy and business strategy, you will ultimately maximize the return to the shareholder. So I think ultimately what we need to do is have corporations and management and board get back to walking the talk. Compensation is certainly an issue in both public and private corporations. So we have to be mindful both of internal equity as well as external equity. Too often compensation is driven by, well, other CEOs make this much, so why shouldn't our CEO? Because we want our CEO to be the best and paid as much as the others. But you forget about internal equity, and that's just as important, especially to creating a healthy corporate culture. I think the philanthropy strategies of corporations could evolve to where they're much more tied into fulfilling the overall purpose of the corporation. Rather than just being an add-on, they could actually contribute to the fulfillment of the mission and purpose of a corporation. I think we need to be more active in telling our story in all sorts of media, social media, the press, television. I don't think we do a good enough job of talking about the good things that we're doing. I think when we do make mistakes, and corporations and boards certainly make mistakes, they have to acknowledge the mistakes, the missteps, and be accountable for them. Be truthful about it and talk about how you're going to get better. And finally, I'll get back to it's all about having a board and management that have passion for the purpose of the company and adhere to the mission and adhere to the core values. And that will win back the reputation that American corporations and American capitalism deserves.
I couldn't have stated it better myself, and no wonder Whole Foods is such a revered company. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us on the show today. Again, you have a lot of fans out there, starting with my family, so keep up the good work in the stores, and we wish Whole Foods the best fortune.
Thank you, TK. It's been a pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week, where we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. We'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom. Brought to you by NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.